In February of 1994, 31-year-old Gloria Ramirez, a late-stage cervical cancer patient, arrived at Riverside General Hospital in Southern California, presenting with heart palpitations, confusion, and irregular breathing.
Okay, as I often do when it's your opening, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you describe things and you lay situations and you're very evocative of the time in which your events are happening, right? So what I'm doing now is 1994.
Yes.
I'm in ripped jeans. I'm in a flannel shirt. Grunge is king.
Yes, absolutely.
So cervical cancer, and she's presenting with
heart palpitations, confusion, and irregular breathing.
Okay.
Yes, her blood pressure was plummeting because her heart was beating so rapidly its chambers couldn't fill before pumping. She was conscious, but when asked questions, her answers were incoherent. She couldn't string a proper sentence together. A respiratory therapist named Maureen Welch, who was present at the time, was perplexed. These were symptoms you would expect from elderly patients coming into the ER, not from a 31-year-old, even if that 31-year-old is suffering from cancer.
Yeah.
But that would be far from the last perplexing thing about Gloria Ramirez's time at Riverside General. By the end of the night, Ramirez would be dead and have left a trail of inexplicably ill medical professionals in her wake before her body would be carried out in a sealed aluminum casket by a hazmat team.
Fucking love it. This is the pre-credits opening of an episode of Fringe right here. This is an X-Files episode
yeah,
already.
You're totally right. Yeah.
Bring back Fringe. Anyway, go on.
So, according to an article in the science magazine Discover, a year after the incident, the medical team went straight to work administering her, quote, Valium, Versed, and Ativan to sedate her, and agents such as lidocaine and beryllium to quell her aberrant heartbeat, while also forcing air into Ramirez's lungs with an ambu bag, a football-sized rubber bladder connected to a plastic mask.
Yeah, I've seen those.
Over the patient's nose and mouth. Yeah, it sounds intense, but you've seen it before. It's essentially like mouth to mouth, but with only one mouth. It's a more sanitary way of doing it.
I was going to say ball to mouth, but that's an entirely different setup.
Yeah, no, and I feel like it wouldn't be helpful either. No.
Sir, must you?
We have to explore all options. She responded poorly to the treatments, though, and as they attempted defibrillation, the team noticed a sort of oily sheen over her whole body, as well as a garlicky, sweet smell that seemed to be coming off her breath. So an RN, a registered nurse named Susan Kane, put a syringe in Ramirez's arm for blood samples, but was startled when she pulled it out to find that there was a chemical smell to the blood.
Oh, fuck, this is amazing.
Which, can you imagine how strong a chemical smell in blood would have to be that you pull a syringe out and you notice it?
Oh,
not Jesus, like they don't pull them out and like immediately sniff them.
Smelly blood.
Yeah, so the respiratory therapist that I mentioned earlier, Maureen Welch, she had a sniff at it and expected it to have the putrid odor often associated with patients who are undergoing chemotherapy, which is a side effect I did not know was a thing.
Chemo gives you smelly blood?
Chemo gives you smelly blood. So, take that to the water cooler. But that wasn't what it smelled like. It smelled like ammonia. And a medical resident in the room noticed there were manila-colored particles floating around in the vial, which is pretty unusual for blood. There shouldn't be unidentified particles in it, manila or otherwise. So as Kane, the RN who initially noticed the blood smell, turned toward the door, she suddenly swayed, and the doctor caught her just in time as her limp body dropped to the floor.
Oh.
Soon, the medical resident also started to feel lightheaded and left the room to sit at a nurse's desk. As someone inquired as to whether she was okay, she lost consciousness and slipped from the chair to the floor.
What is happening?
Both medical professionals were taken away on gurneys, the first complaining that her face felt like it was burning, and the second shaking all over and intermittently stopping breathing for seconds at a time. Apnea. Then Susan Welch went down, remembering only that she heard someone scream, and then she woke up with no control over her limbs. So more of the medical staff started to fall ill, and Humberto Ochoa, the doctor who was in charge of the ER, ordered that all of the rooms be evacuated and the patients be treated in the parking lot.
Wow.
Only a small staff remained inside trying to save Gloria Ramirez. According to the Discover article, quote, In all, 23 of the 37 emergency room staff members experienced at least one symptom. 5 were hospitalized for the rest of the night. Balderas endured bouts of apnea during a 10-day hospitalization. Gorchinsky, the most severely ill, spent 2 weeks in intensive care where...
These don't come into contact with...
Yes, these are people who were in the room or around her in there. This is, listen to this, Mark. The most severely ill one, Gorchinsky, she spent 2 weeks in intensive care where, in addition to apnea, she suffered from hepatitis, pancreatitis, and you're going to love this one, avascular necrosis, a condition in which bone tissue is starved of blood and begins to die. In her case, the avascular necrosis attacked her knees, restricting her to crutches for months.
What the fuck?
Yeah. A clinical toxicologist at Oregon State University, Sheldon Wagner, said it would take a really damn potent toxin to do something like that. So naturally, the first assumption was that there was some sort of hazardous material causing all this illness.
Yeah.
And a hazmat team was dispatched to the hospital to search for any kind of gases or
so I'm looking in
chemicals.
The vents. I'm looking in the basement.
Right.
You know what I mean? I'm looking in the walls.
Exactly. All of that stuff. They come in, they're checking all of that to see if, there's gases, noxious chemicals, anything like that that's seeping in to the hospital and causing these people to be poisoned.
I'm on a walkie-talkie. I'm saying, get me building services. I'm barking orders. You know what I mean? Nobody comes in or out of this building right now until we fucking get a beat on this.
That's legitimately what's happening. You're 100% right. And they found nothing. Which on the one hand is a good thing, but on the other hand meant they still had no idea what had sent 23 medical professionals to their own emergency room and killed Gloria Ramirez. So the next logical assumption was, holy shit, Gloria is the hazardous material.
Yeah, completely.
They put on those cool little moon suits that you think of when you think of the hazmat people, and they exactly.
ET suit.
Examined the body in a sealed off chamber, again just like ET.
100%.
It's all ET. And they emerged with samples of blood and tissue along with air from the body bag and an aluminum crate holding the body. Still, the coroner had no answers after the autopsy was performed.
What?
Yep. There was nothing there that could say why this had happened to people. Nothing on her body or in her blood or anything like that seemed, from the tests that they run, to say that she should have died from anything other than her cancer, or that anyone else should have been poisoned by this. Totally without a clue. So the Forensic Science Center at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory was called in by a criminologist at the Riverside Coroner's Office. The center's director, Brian Anderson, said that their plan was straightforward: to analyze the compounds, both organic and inorganic, in the blood, bile, and tissues from Ramirez's organs, including her heart, liver, lungs, brain, and kidneys. The team would also check for any gases that may have vented off the samples into the headspace, hence why they sort of took samples of the air from inside of there. So the pocket of air separating the samples from the tops of their containers. He then analyzed the samples using a gas chromatograph mass spectrometer, which is a device that we have discussed before. Do you remember when, Mark?
Gas chronograph mass spectrometer. Let me think. I mean, there's plenty of circumstances where one of those bad boys would have come in handy.
Seems like it might.
Did it get used in one of these schools where all the kids went fucking all weird because of the psychogenic fugue?
Okay. This came up when we discussed how to commit the perfect murder, because it is one of only 2 ways that you can detect wolfsbane in a human.
Very nice.
So, using the spectrometer, Anderson found several chemical compounds, including the drugs lidocaine, Tylenol, codeine, and Tigan, an anti-nausea medication. All of those things you would expect to find in the body of a cancer patient who had died, as well as a lot of hydrocarbons, chemicals that had leached into the samples from their sterile plastic containers. And those, they note, can actually cause a lot of weird false hits. People think there are anomalies in blood and stuff because they're like, what are all these hydrocarbons? But it comes from those sterile tubes. So
I like your impression of a confused hematologist. As, what is this? What are all the things in the blood?
It's spot on, I think. That's how they talk. Looking further, though, he found some notable anomalies, and some of them were somewhat easily explained, like the presence of amine and nicotinamide. But one other compound caught his attention, dimethyl sulfone. Quote, broken down by the liver, dimethyl sulfone has a half-life in the body of less than 3 days. So healthy people never have measurable amounts in their system. But in Ramirez's blood and tissues, there was a hefty concentration of tens of micrograms per milliliter, about 3 times higher than the codeine in the samples. Still, that shouldn't have taken out all these people in the ER. So they're stumped by it nonetheless. And thus, as you just brought up, folks started to suspect that what we had here was an incident of mass sociogenic illness.
Yeah.
As we've talked about before, smells are the most common trigger for this mass hysteria. And we know this room was absolutely brimming with off-putting odors.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was kind of the theory they came up with. But the hospital workers obviously didn't accept that. Like, that one woman was in there with like her bones being eaten away. She's like, that's
exactly. I don't care how fucking
you can't
stressed
convince yourself that that would happen. You can't convince yourself into hepatitis. That's not a thing. So they,
even if you're really convinced,
right? No matter how hard you try. So they filed a $6 million lawsuit in response to having been put in a dangerous situation and then told that they'd made it all up. So Anderson brought in his deputy director, a man called Grant, who is a nuclear chemist, to look over the case. And when Grant was given the case files, he actually confused dimethyl sulfone with dimethyl sulfoxide, or DMSO. Now, hold on a moment.
Yeah,
here.
sure.
It's a chemical that had been sold in gel form in the 1960s for pain relief for athletes, but turned out to be wildly toxic and caused things like blindness. Grant had actually used DMSO in his own days as an athlete, and as he looked through the case file, he noticed some very interesting things, namely Gloria's sweet garlic breath and the oily sheen on her body, things associated with DMSO.
Holy shit, Dead Kennedys have a track called DMSO.
Do they really?
Yes, they do.
Oh, that's very interesting. And his reading mistake ended up leading them actually on an important path. So now, this part is going to sound familiar because of the hell world we live in now. According to Discover in 1995, about 2/3 of cancer patients used some sort of non-prescribed home treatment. And DMSO, which was at this point literally only sold for the purpose of like use as a high-powered machine degreaser, had become a folk remedy. Yeah. This is, for those at home, Mark has a very troubled, shocked look on his face.
Holy shit.
To that.
So it went from athletic supplement to lube, machine lube.
Yeah, basically. Worse than lube. It's stuff that cleans it, that takes grease off of this. This is not something you want.
Fuck me.
Yeah. It's not just oiling it up. It is pulling
94
shit
was a
off
bad year for DMSO.
Yeah, very much so. But the thing about this too is that the stuff that's sold as this machine degreaser is like a 90% concentration of it, a high level of purity. Sorry, the phone rang. Oh. Okay. A high level of purity, far beyond the potency of the already dangerous joint pain lotion that had been sold decades before. I think it was like 60% or something like that for the other, and this is at 90. And so obviously there's a huge difference if you're rubbing that all over your body from the stuff that they were marketing to you for joint pain. But as this points out, like people do that who get cancer diagnoses, especially someone young like her, who it was caught too late for her to do anything about it. She'll try anything. So she was likely putting this on, or theoretically, as we'll see. So this was still baffling to them because, again, this shouldn't have affected other people. And further, it was dimethyl sulfone, not sulfoxide, that had been found in the autopsy. And the difference between those is one oxygen molecule. So Grant tried to figure out what other compounds might be formed by adding oxygen to the mix. And that's when he came across dimethyl sulfate. So, quote, vapors of dimethyl sulfate kill cells in exposed tissue, such as the eyes, mouth, and lungs. When absorbed into the body, dimethyl sulfate causes convulsions, delirium, paralysis, coma,
Hello.
and delayed
Hello.
damage to the kidneys, liver, and heart, essentially all of the things that Gloria and her attendings had experienced. A classified Department of Defense document issued in 1987 called the Reference Book on Chemical Warfare Information reported that a 10-minute exposure to half a gram of dimethyl sulfate dispersed in a cubic meter of air can kill a person. Yeah.
Wow.
Now, again, this still shouldn't have been found in her body, right?
Yeah,
What
yeah,
she
yeah, yeah,
had
yeah.
was potentially the DMSO. And somehow this becomes oxygenated, right? Gets that
So was
extra
she
molecule.
metabolizing this somehow?
So what the scientists postulate is that when Ramirez collapsed, and the collapse was probably from cancer-related kidney failure. That's what they determined was like her cause of death. It was kidney failure, and I think like a heart attack as a result of this. She didn't die from the stuff that made everyone else sick. So when she collapsed and was put in an ambulance, the paramedics put an oxygen mask on her face.
Wow, that's wild.
Yes, oxygen molecules flooded her bloodstream, combining with the DMSO in her system to form high levels of dimethyl sulfone.
Made herself into a living chemical weapon.
Exactly. Yeah.
Fuck.
The fact that she had a urinary tract blockage at the time might have contributed to the buildup of the compound because her system wasn't flushing it out properly.
Mate. She was fucking airtight.
It's all locked in there. So the higher the concentrations of the ingredients, the more efficiently chemical reactions will run. Thus, with so much oxygen, no DMSO was left untransformed. It all made that chemical journey into the dimethyl sulfate.
Oh, that's wild.
The boffins dissolved dimethyl sulfone in a transparent liquid called Ringer solution, which is basically all the ingredients of blood minus red blood cells. And they found that when it cooled, it produced crystals like the manila particles found in Gloria's blood. So what happened was when Susan Kane drew the blood at the hospital, it cooled, right? When it's in your body, blood is much warmer than when you take it out. And when it's warm, that would have essentially sort of diffused these particles of this chemical. Right? And that's why you don't normally find this in people. But when she took it out, the blood cooled and it produced these crystals, and it slowed the breakdown of the dimethyl sulfate. So in warm blood, dimethyl sulfate breaks down. Cooled blood, as she pulled it out of her, didn't break down. And then appreciable amounts of it built up in the syringe, and some of it vaporized out of the blood. This was the gas that poisoned the emergency room staff. So essentially what happened was Kane took this thing out. She went, oh, that smells funny. She handed it to other people, like, does this smell funny to you? And they just waved the vapor of dimethyl
getting a good old fucking noseful
around here.
That's amazing.
Yeah, essentially, it's just like a bizarre combination of conditions inside and outside of Gloria's body, all happened to diverge or converge in the exact right circumstances.
So she was taking this DMSO as
a topical sort of means of relieving pain and trying to cure her cancer.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is where might she have got that into her head? Because it strikes me as this is an extreme example of some of the potential knock-on effects of dickheads recommending fucking, horse dewormer or hydroxychloroquine or fucking
it's
nonsense
exactly
like
the same thing. Yeah, I mean, I think we kind of tend to think that like is a new phenomenon of the internet, but you can see, I'm sure that like you went to, there were probably, it's 1995, there's probably a few forums and stuff like that on the internet that people could go to, but in general, I'm sure there were support groups for cancer patients. I'm sure there were health stores that you would go to and they'd be like, there is this stuff, DMSO. It was really good in the 1960s, but they banned it. But you can still get it.
Yeah.
And people, they didn't know that it's a completely different concentration of it and that it's actually super harmful.
If it works, great. If it doesn't, use it to lube up your fucking lawnmower or whatever.
Right.
Either way, win-win.
Yeah. Win-win for you right there. So that is the story of how poor Gloria Ramirez became the toxic lady.
Very surprised that tale or a version of it hasn't found its way into fiction. Surely to fuck that's a great idea.
Maybe there is somewhere, I don't know,
to convert someone into a biological weapon without their realizing, and whack them full of oxygen and push them into a room, that kind of thing. That's hilarious.
But the fact that it was like accidental in this way, someone using something like that someone putting an oxygen mask on them, causing this concentration, the fact of the blood, just, a normal process, taking blood out, all of that stuff
Wonderful.
caused this is wild. So
that
thanks.
came from one of our Facebook crew,
Yes.
didn't it? Who
And I
shared that?
can't remember who it was who posted it, but thank you so much for posting that on Facebook. I saved that one even after last week. So I was like, this one I think gets an entire cold open.
Give me a sec. I'm going to find out because that was too fucking fascinating.
Yeah, it's a very good story.
To go unthanked. Here we go. It was Ryan Joyner, sir.
Ryan, wonderful. Ryan Joyner, thank you so much.
Yeah, great share, buddy.
I adore you, sir, and thank you for bringing that to our attention, because that was a fun story. I mean, not fun, it's terrible, but
it was, yeah. While that was going on, I bet if at least some of the people involved must have turned to one another at one point and gone, "There's going to be a podcast about this at some point." When podcasts are invented,
yeah, when they come up with that concept, this is going on.
Yeah.